of security or belonging. And I join the Secretary General in expressing my deepest condolences to the families of the 35 UN staff members who have lost their lives in the noble cause of humanitarian service. I also take this opportunity to pay tribute to the entire UNRWA staff and other humanitarian workers for their continued unwavering and heroic efforts under these very distressing circumstances. Excellencies, all parties to this conflict must abide by international humanitarian law and immediately create the necessary conditions to allow for an opening of humanitarian corridor to the Gaza Strip. We must ensure that urgently needed life-saving assistance reaches those in need, from the delivery of basic foodstuff to the safe passage of humanitarian aid, humanitarian and medical staff. Any action to the contrary, to deprive the people of Gaza unimpeded access to essential livelihood supply, would be a clear violation of their human rights and an affront to international humanitarian law. We, the United Nations, cannot allow our fundamental principles of human rights and of international law to be compromised. As the United Nations, we are obliged to uphold them without any conditions or reservations, and certainly without any exceptions. Over the years, the United Nations has conducted successful humanitarian operations that have had significant impacts. I am both appreciative of and encouraged by the Israeli cooperation that led to the successful passage into Gaza of some aid trucks from Egypt. But this is clearly a drop in the ocean of Gaza's 2.5 million inhabitants, almost half of whom are children. Excellencies, dear colleagues, at this juncture, the most immediate step is clear. The violence must cease and further bloodshed must be prevented. I call for the prompt and unconditional release of all hostages. I also call for an immediate, unconditional humanitarian ceasefire. And I also call for an immediate, unconditional opening of corridors of humanitarian assistance and relief. The only path to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace is a negotiated two-state solution consistent with international law, the UN Charter, and relevant United Nations resolutions. A solution that fulfills Israel's legitimate needs for security and that fulfills the state of Palestine's legitimate aspirations for an independent state. I urge all parties, state and non-state, to set aside their animosities and focus instead on averting war through prioritizing saving lives. This means focusing on the core purpose of our charter. It means engaging in dialogue and harnessing the support of the Secretary General and his Special Coordinator, Tor Wennesland. I also welcome international initiatives that focus on consensus building, spreading accurate and verified information, and putting an end to the violence and despair. Given the gravity of the situation on the ground, this cannot be just another business as usual session. I urge the membership to use today's session not to further fan the flames of hate, division, and revenge. Let us seize the opportunity instead to unify our purpose and our actions to save lives and to end violence. Let me assure you of my deep personal commitment to support any and all initiatives to this end. I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the observer state of Palestine.
Mr. President, colleagues, let us all remember we are meeting here while Palestinians in Gaza are under the bombs. Remember that you are speaking while families are being killed, while hospitals are coming to a halt, while neighborhoods are being destroyed, while people are fleeing from one place to another with nowhere safe to go. I urge you to choose your words carefully and to act accordingly. For all those mobilized against an even greater man-made humanitarian catastrophe or of a regional spillover. And these are worthy goals, we say, stop the bombs or both will happen. Stop the bombs and save lives, as the President of the General Assembly has indicated. All lives, lives of children, of civilians, of 2.3 million civilians in the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, in Gaza, a father tells his daughter about the birthday he was planning for her and asks her not to miss it. A mother laments, "My children died before they had a chance to eat." The thoughts that cross the mind of a mother in the face of such grief. 3,000 children in Gaza were killed by Israel in the last almost 3 weeks. I repeat, 3,000 children, innocent children, angels, killed in Gaza during the last 3 weeks. A man embraces his mother and pleads like a child. "Come back, I beg you. Come back, and I will take you wherever you want." He hugs her and can let go. But there is no time to mourn. More death is on the way. 1,700 women were killed by Israel in the last 2 weeks. A young man wrote, "We will not leave Gaza. We will only leave Gaza to join the heavens." A few days later, he did. 7,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel in the last almost 3 weeks. 70% of all those killed are women and children. Almost all killed are civilians. Is this the war some of you are defending? Let me repeat, is this the war that some of you are defending? Can this war be defended? These are crimes. This is barbarism. If you do not stop it for all those who were killed, stop it for all those whose lives we can still save. Jinan, a little girl under the rubble, shouts at the people coming to rescue her. "What took you so long?" There are 900 Palestinian children under the rubble, alive or dead, wondering what is taking so long, wondering if any help is on the way. Anas, a little boy who is known as Anus, crawled from under the rubble, not to find light, but more darkness, devastations and death all around him. His ordeal has only started, not ended. 1,600 Palestinians are under the rubble, and no one can reach them to save them or bury them. A doctor speaks of a term coined during this war: wounded child with no surviving family. 80 Palestinian families have lost 10 or more of their members. Sometimes up to 45 members of the same family were killed. 18,000 people are wounded, many treated in hospital hallways, if at all, with no anesthesia. Paramedics who have seen death time and time again break down and cry. This time is just too much. UN staff, humanitarian personnel, and doctors are standing their ground and paying the ultimate price for it. This memory is honored by some as if a natural disaster had killed them, not a UN member staff. As hospitals turn into morgues, doctors and patients alike wonder, is help on the way? Is help on the way? They are not listening to the explanations of some leaders on why the war has to go on. They just hear the bombs. They just feel the blast. They just face all this death trying to survive or to honor the pledge they took to save lives with no means to do so. People are ordered to evacuate. They look at their children. Should we head south? Will we be bombed on the way or once there? Should we go to a hospital courtyard, a UN school, a church, a mosque, sleep in our car in the streets? But bombs are everywhere. What choices do you make as a parent when there are only impossible choices, when death is everywhere, devastation is everywhere? a man stands in front of his house, turned into rubble yet another time. After a long pause, he asks, "How do you bury a house?" Israel has destroyed over 40% of all homes, making an entire population homeless and displaced, 1.4 million people, in the hope to forcibly transfer them outside the territory. The Israeli foreign minister came to the Security Council and said, "This meeting should conclude with a clear message. Bring them home. For millions of Palestinians, there is no home to go back to. For thousands, there is no family left to embrace. Not by an act of God, but by the acts of a government represented here in this chamber." He spoke of families and their pain. There is not a single family in Gaza that has not endured epic suffering. He told you horrible it was to kill civilians, just before justifying the killing of Palestinian civilians by the thousands. He spoke of the fear felt by people when rockets are launched. Israeli bombs have not spared a single square meter of Gaza. He believes the difference between civilization and barbarism is who is doing the killing or how they do it. He believes the laws of humanity and of our international law-based order apply to others but not to Israel. That they protect Israeli lives and allow the killing of Palestinians and taking Palestinian lives. He believes Israel can pretend it is abiding by the very laws it is breaching live on your TV screens and before your eyes. That if you say Hamas enough times, the world will not be able to object to wiping off from the face of earth entire families, 4 generations at a time, or to a siege where you let in enough humanitarian aid to pretend you have a sense of humanity, but nowhere enough to address the immense needs that are growing exponentially as you keep bombing a besieged territory. He says release the hostages and takes 2 million Palestinian hostages. Let me translate these numbers. Compared to the population of Gaza, this is the equivalent of 28,000 Israelis killed, including 12,000 children and 6,800 women, 72,000 wounded, 5.6 million displaced. Is it more shocking now? More unacceptable? More outrageous? Why some feel so much pain for Israelis and so little pain for us, the Palestinians? What is the problem? Do we have the wrong faith? The wrong skin color? The wrong nationality? The wrong origin? Let me address all those who have, in these past few days, explained why one should not call for a ceasefire. How can representatives of states explain how horrible it is that 1,000 Israelis were killed and not feel the same outrage when 1,000 Palestinians are now killed every day? 1,000 Palestinians killed every day. Why not feel a sense of urgency to end their killing? Nothing can justify war crimes. crime against humanity, and genocide. Nothing can justify the killing of a single Palestinian child. Nothing. Nothing at all. Why not feel a sense of urgency to end our killing? Nothing can, as I said, justify war crimes. You are setting us back 80 years by trying to justify what Israel is doing now. How naive one has to be, or how hypocritical to pretend they don't know Israel is voluntarily killing Palestinian civilians. Who can believe that those killed by Israel are, for 70% children and women, and that entire families were killed while Israel is trying to minimize civilian death? They kill all of us, they kill thousands of us, and they say they are trying to minimize killing civilians. How would it look like if they were trying to maximize killing Palestinian civilians? If killing 7,000 is to minimize, killing 700,000 would be possible to maximize? We don't need you to offer us semantic reassurances about IHL and protection of civilians. We need you to honor these norms, not recall them only to justify their breach seconds later. This selective outrage is outrageous and needs to stop, and need to stop now. These people you watch on your screens for a few minutes a day, every night, while they are being slaughtered, they have survived decades of military occupation, a 16 years long blockade, and 5 wars in the Gaza Strip. They built and rebuilt their lives and their homes again and again against all odds, despite tremendous suffering. They are walking miracles. How could you leave them to be killed once again? The answer to the killing of Palestinian civilians is not the killing of Israeli civilians. And the answer to the killing of Israeli civilians is not the killing of Palestinian civilians. Vengeance is a dead end. The only path forward is justice. The only path forward is justice. Justice for the Palestinian people. Don't distort the law. Don't bend it. Don't break it. Don't betray it to accommodate Israel. Uphold it, and uphold it high. This is what we are here for as a United Nations, to save future generations from the scourge of war. Uphold it for the sake of all nations, for the credibility of these United Nations. Mr. President, Wael al-Dahduh was reporting on the massacres in Gaza. For those of you who do not, who is Wael al-Dahduh? He is the field correspondent of Al Jazeera in the Gaza Strip. As he's been doing relentlessly for days now, when he received the news of an Israeli airstrike that killed his wife, his son, and his daughter, he did something many parents do in these circumstances. He spoke to his son, waiting for an answer that never came. He told him, "Didn't you tell me you wanted to be a journalist?" His son wanted to be a journalist, even though journalists are targets in Palestine. Remember Shireen Abu Akleh? Now, the dream of the son will haunt the father. Wa'il said a few words that I want you to hear well. He said, they took their vengeance out on our children. He then said in a heartbreaking voice, Malish, allow me to explain it to you. Literally, it means that's okay. But let me tell you what I believe he meant. Let me do it in Arabic. تبا لواقع تقتل فيه غزة.
What a world where Gaza is being killed again before the cameras of the world. Shame on all those who do not respect our humanity, our dignity, our suffering. All those who justify the acts of the killer instead of standing by the victim, to all those who justify the crime and give condolences to the victim and explain that the killer is not responsible for the killing. Shame to all those who do not stand by our people in Gaza and put an end to the massacre. Shame to this forum if a word of truth is not pronounced on it. Shame to the one who will speak after me to defend the wrong and justify the killing of innocent people. There is no justice on this earth. We have God. We have only God to go to.
Finally, I appeal to all of you. Vote to stop the killing. Vote for humanitarian aid to reach those whose very survival depends on it. Vote to stop this madness. You have a chance to do something, to give an important signal. Choose justice, not vengeance. Choose to defend the law, not justify its breach. Choose peace, not more wars. Vote to put an end to almost 3 weeks of the worst double standards we have seen in decades. To restore some credibility of this place and the rules it is supposed to embody. Do not miss this chance. Lives are hanging in the balance, and every life is sacred. Please save lives, save lives, save lives. Vote for our draft resolution, and I thank you.
I now give the floor to the distinguished Deputy Prime Minister. I now give the floor to Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, we are gathered here in this hall today as a result of a resolution called Uniting for Peace. Sadly, this emergency session has nothing to do with peace. Every member state here today who is convinced that we are about to discuss yet another round of conflict in the Middle East, another dispute between Israel and the Palestinians, is wrong. The October 7th massacre and what ensued has nothing to do with the Palestinians. Nothing. It has nothing to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Palestinian question. This is not a war with the Palestinians. Israel is at war with the genocidal jihadist Hamas terror organization. Only. It is the law-abiding democracy of Israel against modern-day Nazis. These are the facts. Hamas do not care about the Palestinian people. They do not care about peace or dialogue. Hamas has only one goal: to annihilate Israel and murder every single Jew on the face of the earth. Their original charter makes this very clear. I'll read you a few lines. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it. Another quote, there is no solution for the Palestinian problem except by jihad. Another quote, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Friends, on October 7th, it became clear to the entire world that Hamas's charter was not a compilation of empty words. It was an action plan. An action plan. Imagine a bright sunny day, clear skies, music in the air, young people are dancing, a rave, a concert for peace. Yes, for peace. It is early morning on the holy Sabbath. The sun is just risen to mark a new day. It is also a festive Jewish high holiday, Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah means the joy of the Torah, where we celebrate the book of books, our holy Bible. And then, in one split second, this idyllic Eden became hell on earth. The peaceful morning air was pierced with the wail of rocket sirens. Thousands, I'm telling you, thousands of Hamas mortars and rockets rained down indiscriminately on many Israeli cities and villages. But the rockets were only cover for the pogrom that followed. Barbaric Hamas terrorists invaded Israel from the sea, the land, and the air. They came with one purpose only: to savagely murder every living thing they encountered. Hamas Nazi murders went from house to house with hit lists. A thoroughly planned, willful, premeditated attack. They brutally murdered civilians in their beds. They drove pickup trucks with machine guns. Yes, we all remember, just like ISIS, and fired blindly at hundreds of young people at a concert. 300 were burned alive or butchered in that concert. Much of what remained were clumps of flesh and bloody limbs. Parents had to bring their children's toothbrushes for DNA so they could figure out whose limb belonged to who. These Hamas monsters raped women and children, parading naked girls that they raped and bodied that they defiled through the streets of Gaza, while thousands, and I'm telling you, thousands, you can see the footage, jeered and cheered. The savages tortured small babies. Just like the Nazis, Hamas terrorists removed infants from their cribs. Yes, we have it on video. Swung them repeatedly against the ground until their skulls became a pulp. Children were murdered in front of their parents, and parents in front of their children. I've seen a video of a terrorist filmed by himself, who tossed a grenade into a bomb shelter with a father and his two young boys inside. The father was killed instantly, and the two boys ran out of the shelter screaming that their father is dead and that they want to be dead too. All this is occurring, believe it or not, as the monster who murdered their father calmly helps himself to the contents of the family's fridge. Yes, no horror movie compares to the pure brutality that Hamas carried out. No, none. Amit Man, a 22-year-old from Kibbutz Be'eri, and a paramedic for Magen David Adom, Israel's Red Cross. She dedicated her life, literally, and you will understand why, to saving others. When the Hamas monsters invaded the kibbutz, Amit ran to the clinic to treat as many wounded as she could. For hours, Amit worked non-stop trying to save lives. She knew the sadistic terrorists were outside her clinic because she heard the gunfire, but she stayed there. She was committed to saving lives, not running away. Finally, the terrorists burst into her clinic and put a bullet through her brain. She was a Magen David Adom paramedic, the Israeli Red Cross, in uniform. But that didn't stop these savages. This is how the rescue teams found Amit. Ambulances were set on fire. Not one, many. Dozens of Magen David Adom medical teams were intentionally targeted on their way to tend to the wounded, and many other paramedics were murdered. Barzilai Hospital in my hometown city, Ashkelon, in Israel, suffered direct hits from Hamas rockets. Not for the first time. Hamas has been deliberately firing rockets at it for years, intentionally. Yet, not a single condemnation of this barbarity has been mentioned here. Not here, not by the Security Council, not by the Secretary General, and not by this absurd resolution. It seems that hospitals and medical teams only need to be protected as long as they are not Israeli. The hypocrisy is beyond belief, beyond belief. The brutal ISIS-like monsters abducted over 220 hostages from Israel and dozens of other countries, including babies, children, persons with disabilities, the elderly, and Holocaust survivors. Kfir Bibas is 9 months old. 9 months old, and he is being held right now in Gaza as a hostage. 9 months old. What barbaric terrorist can do such a thing? And together with him, 30 other children. 30 other children. We saw Hamas's brutality in Israel. I cannot begin to fathom what horrors the hostages are enduring right now, as we speak here. 20 days have gone by, and Israel is still counting her dead. It took weeks to collect all of the bodies. Some bodies are burnt like pieces of coal. It is almost impossible to identify them. Countless burned bodies have been found with ash in their throats, meaning they were still alive when lit on fire, intentionally, by the Hamas terrorists. a clump of charred human remains that was burned beyond recognition was found. At first, the medical personnel couldn't figure out what they were looking at. Yet, after a CT scan, it became clear that they were two spines, not one, two spines bound together with wire. One belonging to an adult, and the other, the small spine, of a child. So just try to imagine that parents feeling as they and their child were burning alive. The painful screaming of the love of their life was the last thing they heard, the last thing. Do you not think it's unbelievable that this resolution here today and this session are not solely focused on Hamas's atrocities? When reading this resolution, Hamas seems to be missing in action. The drafters of the resolution claim to be concerned about peace, yet the depraved murderers who initiated this war are not even mentioned in the resolution, not even mentioned. They see each one of you as puppet. They write a resolution completely devoid of any content related to the situation. They assume that you have already forgotten who it is that is responsible for the inhumane violence, and they just expect you to support it automatically. This resolution is a disgrace to your intelligence, a disgrace. It is unfathomable that such a resolution, one that doesn't even mention Hamas, could possibly be voted upon here. Let that sink in, please. Distinguished representatives, Hamas carried out atrocities, the likes of which we have not seen since the Holocaust. Yet, unlike the Holocaust, where the evidence we have is mostly black and white photographs and soundless footage, here the proof is in high definition. Because some of it is from, yes, security footage, but much of it is from the cell phones and GoPro cameras belonging to the Hamas Nazis themselves. Many may be asking, why did they film their sadistic violence? Well, I'll tell you why. Very simple. They filmed it in order to terrorize the Israeli public, to release these videos and put fear in the hearts of the citizens of Israel. By the way, this is what terrorists do. They terrorize. I have seen much footage over the past weeks that will be seared into my mind forever. But there is one sight that I keep on seeing when I try to sleep. In the video, one can see a terrible injured civilian, bloodied yet alive, laying on the ground as a Hamas savage screaming, Allahu Akbar, repeatedly pummels the man's neck with a garden hoe in order to decapitate him. The man on the ground is an agricultural worker from Thailand. He's not Israeli, he's not Jewish. He was merely alive trying to make a living for his family. But he was decapitated with a blunt gardening tool. Horrifying. Israel is not at war with human beings. We are at war with monsters. Here is the video.
بس هات سكينة هات سكينة هات سكينة هات سكينة هات بالله عليك بالله عليك أنا بالله عليك الله أكبر هات هذا الثاني.
My mission distributed and will continue to distribute QR codes with a direct link to files where you can see this horror and many other Hamas atrocities. What you see here are not pictures from Auschwitz. but Israelis, raped, butchered, and burned alive. This is not Auschwitz. This is Hamas. There are no words in the English language, in any language, to describe the evil that we all just witnessed. And the reason it is not describable is because it has no place among humankind. Over 1,400 have been slaughtered, 1,000 injured, and over 220 hostages are being held right now by Hamas ISIS terrorists. To say that this is Israel's 9/11 would be an understatement. Proportionally, the death toll of this atrocity is 15 times bigger than 9/11. By the way, our enemies are not 7,000 miles away, they are 7,000 feet away, in our own backyard. So for this reason, Israel's mission is to eradicate this evil from the earth. Eradicate. ISIS was the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and Hamas is the Islamic State of Gaza. So just as was done with ISIS, Hamas must be no more. Our goal is to completely eradicate Hamas's capabilities, and we will use every means at our disposal to accomplish this. Not for revenge, no. Not for retaliation, no. But to ensure that such depravity, such atrocities never occurs again. Israel is at the forefront of the war on radical jihadist terror. And if Israel doesn't succeed in obliterating Hamas's terror capabilities, the whole world will pay the price. Hamas's genocidal ideology, just like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or the Ayatollah regime in Tehran of Iran, is not just about destroying Israel. You all know it. It is ultimately about world domination. It is about bringing the jihad war to the soil of each and every one of your countries. They will not stop until they murder all of the infidels, as they call us. Colleagues, for the past 16 years, the international community and the UN have been complacent to Hamas's terror buildup in Gaza. Complacent. The world has kept its head in the sand as Hamas embedded its missiles and rockets deep within and under the civilian population of Gaza. It accepted an absurd reality that a law-abiding democracy could live side by side with cancerous genocidal terrorists that fire tens of thousands of missiles indiscriminately at our civilians, unprovoked. We have seen that nothing can change Hamas's genocidal ideology. Sadly, not the rehabilitation of Gaza, not economic incentives, not any promise of a brighter future. The UN tried. Many of you tried. But everyone failed. Everyone failed. And you know why? Because nothing can change a genocidal ideology. Nothing. There is only one solution to curing a cancer. It is the evisceration of every cancerous cell. The international community has poured billions of dollars into Gaza, and it all went to Hamas's war machine. It went to its subterranean city of terror. It went to its missile manufacturing facilities. And you remember, 18 years ago, Israel unilaterally withdrew from all of Gaza. We withdrew from all of Gaza. Hamas could have invested the international funding it received into building power plants, water desalination plants, every other civil infrastructure. But no. Instead, Hamas exploited every inch of the Gaza Strip for their violent goals. Because to Hamas, Gazan civilians are nothing more than mere cannon fodder, human shields who in death become pawns for Hamas's libelous propaganda campaign. Hamas is counting on you. They are certain that despite the terror and massacre, the UN will still come to their rescue and prevent Israel from defending itself. Friends, Israel is on a rescue mission. our rescue mission to save our hostages, to save our future, and to save the people of Gaza from their savage tyrants. Our rescue mission. And colleagues, the rescue mission can end quickly. Now, it can end now. No need for complicated, empty resolutions. It can end now. Should Hamas put down their arms, return our hostages, and turn themselves in, this war will end without one more shot being fired. Not even one. Why do you not unite and call on Hamas to do this? If the drafters of this resolution truly want peace, if they truly want an immediate solution, then why do they not demand this of Hamas? Instead, this resolution does the exact opposite of finding a solution. The exact opposite. Rather than promoting peace, it only ensures more violence. It should be called uniting for terror, not uniting for peace. Israel has been attacked and continues to be attacked. This is a fact right now in the south from Hamas and in the north from Hezbollah. Meanwhile, the resolution calls for an immediate ceasefire. A ceasefire means giving Hamas time to rearm itself so they can massacre us again. This is not speculation. They will do so. You all know this. Any call for a ceasefire is not an attempt at peace. It is an attempt to tie Israel's hands, preventing us from eliminating a huge threat to our citizens. But the resolution's distortions go even deeper than that. Hamas, the terror group that started this war, I reiterate, is not even mentioned, not even once. In fact, the only hidden reference to these barbaric terrorists can be found in calls on both parties. Both parties? This is a false, immoral comparison between the law-abiding democracy of Israel and genocidal jihadists. And the drafters are counting on the fact that each and every distinguished representative here will blindly go along with their ploy. This resolution is an insult to your intelligence, and the only place this resolution belongs is in the dustbin of history, the dustbin of history. But colleagues, this resolution is not the only thing here today that is detached from reality. In a short time, a representative of the evil regime that trained, funded, and armed Hamas for the October 7th massacre will address you. The Ayatollah regime of Iran has the blood of thousands of Israelis on its hands. It has the blood of hundreds of thousands of oppressed Iranians, of Ukrainians, of Americans, of Emiratis, and so many others on its hands. Iran is known as the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, and for good reasons. It's completely natural that the foreign minister of this brutal regime should be the speaker following the resolution drafter. The country with a Nazi ideology of annihilating Israel publicly says, stands in solidarity with its proxy Hamas, which shares the same Nazi ideology and aims for our destruction. This is completely understandable. Indeed, mere days ago, he spoke with the leaders of Hamas and its twin terror group, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, praising them for the slaughter. And today he is here to fill your ears with poison. Indeed, uniting for peace, uniting to butcher every Israeli to pieces. This man, the mass murderer, or any other representative of the terror regime in Iran has no place at the UN, let alone in the family of nations. It is a moral stain on the UN and the values it was founded upon. Distinguished colleagues, this week the UN celebrated its 78th birthday. Yet, looking at this resolution and the honorary guests hosted it today in these halls, this organization has shown that it is so broken, so morally corrupt, that I do not have high hopes that it will make it to 90, let alone 100. I'm just a realist. Today serves as the clearest proof that this body is bleeding its relevance, legitimacy, and justification. What we are witnessing today is a desecration of what the UN was meant to be. Following the horrors of the Holocaust, this institution was established to prevent atrocities from repeating themselves. Yet, in these very halls, we have perpetrators of the most grotesque human rights violations and crimes against humanity who also exploit their power and so-called members of the family of nations only to single out law-abiding democracies such as Israel. If this organization wants to maintain any shred of legitimacy, it is imperative that you, please, distinguished representatives, no longer play along with this farce of anti-Israel double standards. Vote against this biased resolution. Stand on the right side of history. Don't stand with the genocidal jihadists committed to your destruction. Rise above internal political considerations and do what is moral and right. Mr. President, Israel will not stop fighting for the truth, even if we remain the sole voice of reason in these halls. Israel will continue combating the genocidal terrorists committed to our destruction. We will not rest until Hamas is obliterated and our hostages are returned home. And we will bring them home. I will conclude with a moment of silence for all the victims of Hamas's atrocity. If the supporters of this resolution choose to ignore the victims in their text, I will pay respect to their memory. Thank you, Mr. President.
I now give the floor to the distinguished Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Kingdom of Jordan, His Excellency Ayman Safadi, on behalf of the Arab Group.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, dear friends, it is at such times of cruelty, inhumanity, and total disregard for international law that we must speak out clearly and unequivocally. There is no room for gray areas here. We must stand for life, for justice, for peace. We must stand against this war in Gaza and the humanitarian catastrophe it is causing. We must stand on the side of our human values and for the charter of these United Nations. History will judge us. Let us not fail the Palestinian people, a besieged people, an occupied people whose days start with death and end with death, whose nights are engulfed by a total blackout, punctured only by the lightning of Israeli missiles, taking away their lives, shattering their dreams, killing their hope. Say no to war. Say no to the killing. Call out war crimes. Defend the right of Palestinian children, women, the elderly, to food, to water, to medicine, to fuel. Speak out against using starvation as a weapon. Children are falling dead under the rubble of homes destroyed by Israeli precision bombs. Some are still alive, under the rubble. There's no sufficient equipment to pull them out. Their parents can still hear them. They talk to them helplessly, knowing that they are running out of air and are slowly dying. Children who may miraculously survive face dehydration and starvation. Israel has killed over 7,000 innocent Palestinians since this new vicious cycle of violence and war erupted on October 7. These are people with names, with faces, with memories, and loved ones left behind. Among them, 16 health workers, 39 UNRWA staff, 22 journalists. Wael Dahdouh, a journalist, had his 8 children separated in 3 different houses, so they are not all killed at the same time if it gets bombed. Yesterday, his wife, Amina, 45 years old. His son Mahmoud, 16 years old. His daughter, Sham, 7 years old. And his infant grandson, Adam, 50 days old. Hear me well. 45 days old were stolen from him by Israel's war. They are not soldiers. And yet, at the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Israeli government, who has cabinet members who openly, shamingly call for wiping out Palestinians from the face of this earth, call them animals unworthy of life, tells you this is not a war on the Palestinian people. If it is not, then why on earth did they kill Adam? عليه وعليهم.
Upon them and upon all of those who have ascended to the heavens, may God's blessings remain.
One doctor in Gaza describes how a boy with injuries and facial burns told him how his house was hit after finishing a meal with his parents. His father, sitting next to him, he says, was killed outright. His mother suffocated in the smoke. I don't have videos to show you. We respect the dead too much. We respect the pain of their families too much to show videos. But check out your mobiles. Thousands of videos depicting the abomination, the horror, the inhumanity to which thousands of Palestinians are being subjected and have been subjected. Israel is making Gaza a perpetual hell on earth. The trauma will haunt generations to come. And dear friends, don't be fooled. Don't let them tell you that this is a war between Muslims and Jews. I stand before you as a Jordanian, as an Arab, as a Muslim, and I tell you, we value life, Muslim life, Christian life, Jewish life. We value the sanctity of life. The Israeli representative did not say a word about Palestinian lives shattered in this war. Yet the Palestinian one before him, and I do, and I say, we care about all lives, about all civilians, Muslims, Christians, Palestinians, Jews, Israelis, all lives. Don't let them tell you otherwise. This is what an insult to intelligence is. Dear friends, rage must not blind us to the futility of violence. It must not desensitize us to the pain of fellow human beings. We condemn the killing of all civilians, no matter their race, their identity, their nationality, or their religion, because these are our human values, and this is our morality. Israel must uphold these values too. How many wars? How much death has our region suffered? And what good did that do? All of us. It did not bring security to Israel. It will not. It did not bring security to any of us. My friends, the right to self-defense is not a license to kill with impunity. Collective punishment is not self-defense. It is a war crime. We must say it as it is. We must refuse the double standards and selective application of international law. Israel cannot remain above the law. Dear friends, a just and lasting peace is the best defense for all. Let the guns go silent, and let the will to live and let live prevail. Let's restore faith in the peace process as the only path to ending this conflict once and for all. Many among us believe that they are helping Israel by supporting its war. They are not. Instead of sending weapons to Israel, send delegations to open an immediate and viable path to peace. This is how they help Israel. And many among us too feel that they are doing their ethical and legal duty towards Palestinians by urging humanitarian supplies be sent to them and not urging an end of this war. They are not doing their duty towards Palestinians. The responsibility towards Palestinian demands that they work for their protection, for peace. Peace that will ensure a viable, independent, sovereign Palestinian state with occupied Jerusalem as its capital on June 4, 1967 lines, living side by side a secure Israel, so that Palestinians live free from occupation and its indignity, so that no Palestinian or Israeli mother has to once again mourn her child. Ladies and gentlemen, Jordan, on behalf of the Arab countries, will put forward a draft resolution. We do so after the United Nations Security Council did not fulfill its responsibility. The draft resolution simply seeks what our United Nations was established to achieve: peace and compliance with international law. We all know Israel will ignore it. It did ignore many UN resolutions before, and yet vote for it, make a stand. Ladies and gentlemen, a month ago, His Majesty King Abdullah II stood before this very assembly. His words echoed true then. They are even more relevant now. He said, and I quote, "Our region will not continue to suffer until the world helps lift the shadow of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the central issue in the Middle East. No architecture for regional security and development can stand over the burning ashes of this conflict. But 7.5 decades on, it still smolders. Where are we going?" Dear friends, let's make a collective cry out against more bloodletting. Let's unite for peace. Let's unite for justice. Let's unite for the right of every Palestinian and every Israeli child to live free from the horrors of war, free from fear, and looking for a life full of promise and full of opportunity. For the sake of the Palestinian people and for the sake of the Israeli people, vote yes. And contrary to what you just heard, the resolution does recognize the pain and the killing on the Israeli side as well. The resolution does condemn the killing of Palestinian and Israeli civilians. Don't be fooled. My friend, let the passing of the draft resolution be a message to Palestinians suffering the inferno of this Israeli war on them. Let it be a message that the international community sees them, feel their pain, and believes that Palestinian lives matter too. Make a stand for peace. Make a stand for life. Make it clear. Make it firm. And before I conclude, I too want to call for a moment of silence. But not just for one side or the other. I want to call for a moment of silence for all the civilians, for all the innocent who fell and who continue to fall in this ugly, abominable war. Thank you so much.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of Jordan, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Hussein Amir Abdullahian, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I thank Your Excellency for holding this meeting. The world knows that the Islamic Republic of Iran plays the most constructive role in helping peace and security, as well as fighting terrorism and ISIS. Mr. President, it has been 3 weeks that we have been witness to the war crimes and genocide of the occupying Israeli regime in Gaza and the West Bank of Palestine. The United States and several European countries have sided with the occupying regime of Israel without observing the UN Charter and international law. They call a Palestinian liberation movement a terrorist, which has the right to self-defense and self-determination. But they refer to the occupying and war criminal regime that is committing genocide in Gaza and having the right to self-defense. Unfortunately, this is the state of our world today. This is the situation of the Security Council, which was supposed to try to establish world peace and security. Today, United States and several European countries are watching and supporting the killing of about 7,000 civilians in less than 3 weeks by the Israeli regime in Gaza and West Bank of Palestine. And they help this regime militarily and financially. We recommend the United States to work for peace and security, not war against people, children, and women. Instead of sending rockets, tanks, and bombs to be used against Gaza, United States should stop supporting genocide in Gaza and Palestine. Mr. President, the history of Iranian civilization shows that we have always supported peace and security. But today in New York and the United Nations, I say frankly to the American statesmen who are now managing the genocide in Palestine that We do not welcome to expansion of the war in the region, but I warn, if the genocide in Gaza continues, they will not be spared from this fire. It is our home, and West Asia is our region. We do not compromise with any party and any side, and we have no reservation when it comes to our home's security. The genocide in Gaza must stop immediately. The forced displacement of the people of Gaza must be stopped immediately. Today, Gaza is waiting for urgent and vital humanitarian aid. According to international law, the Palestinian Liberation Movement, Hamas, is fighting the occupation and has a legitimate right. Mr. President, according to our negotiations, Hamas is ready to release civilian prisoners. On the other hand, the world should support the release of 6,000 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. Now, allow me to continue the rest of my remark in the Persian language.
Mr. President, according to history and based on documents of the United Nations, the Palestinian issue has a history of about 80 years. Therefore, trying to reduce its dimensions to just one attack and on a Palestinian liberation group is a big lie. According to the international law, as well as hundreds of resolutions of this very same assembly, the entire land of Palestine is an occupied land, and according to this, the Zionist regime is recognized as an aggressor and an occupier. The Palestinian nation, like any other nation under occupation, has the indisputable and inherent right of self-determination and has the right to directly and freely decide on its independence and to create an independent government to decide for itself according to international law and as specified by Security Council resolutions number 309 and 323 of 1972 and of the Security Council. In the case of Namibia, the inalienable right to self-determination and independence is permanent and does not disappear with the passage of time. Therefore, just as the prolonged occupation of the land does not create any rights for the occupier, the passage of time does not diminish in the slightest way the right to determine the fate of the occupied nation. According to the principles and rules of the international law and hundreds of resolutions of this very same assembly, the Palestinian nation, as a nation under occupation, has the legitimate right to resist the occupation using all available methods, including armed struggle. Therefore, the recent hypocritical efforts to introduce the struggle of the Palestinian nation against the occupiers as terrorist actions will not deceive the free nations and the awakened consciousness of the world. The United States of America, as the unwavering and permanent supporter of the occupying regime, is the main cause of the failures of the United Nations, especially the Security Council, in upholding the rights of the Palestinians. The country has for dozens of times prevented the Security Council from fulfilling its duties in this field. Mr. President, we believe that the complete and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian issue is only possible through the full realization of the inalienable right of this nation to self-determination and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in all of the Palestinian territories and with Al-Quds as its capital. The entire land of Palestine, from the sea to the river, belongs only to the original Palestinians, including Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And no institution or country has the right or can give any part of it, of this land, to another person or group. The Islamic Republic of Iran believes in the right of the Palestine to resist against occupation, has offered a political and democratic initiative which includes the holding of a referendum for self-determination amongst the original residents of Palestine, including Jews, Christians, and Muslims, which has been registered by the UN as well. The essence and nature of the Zionist regime is based on aggression, occupation, crime, lies, and deception. So far, this regime has launched more than 20 wars in the region, invaded, without any exception, all its neighbors, attacked a number of countries outside its immediate region and neighborhood, and it still occupies the territory of some other Arab countries, in addition to Palestine. It has committed all the four main international crimes, namely aggression, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Not once, but many times, and in some cases, all four crimes simultaneously. And to advance his illegitimate goals, it has failed to adhere to any humane principles or legal rules. Ladies and gentlemen, we must see reality as it is. And the reality is that brutal occupation has transformed into brutal and deep apartheid. It is this terrible combination of chronic occupation and deep apartheid that gives the occupying regime the psychological permission to butcher and mass kill the people under occupation. Therefore, now is the time to consider the real face of this regime and see it as it is, as the General Assembly did in 1975 through resolution number 3379 by identifying Zionism as apartheid and racism. Mr. President, I would like to emphasize that the recent action of the Palestinian nation as well as the action of the Liberation Organization of Hamas against the occupiers, according to the applicable rules of the international law, is completely legitimate and inherent right, and attributing any other title to it is absolutely illegal and unacceptable. Claims such as the right of the so-called legitimate defense should be granted to an occupying regime is also a very ridiculous joke. It is certainly not possible to change the places of the killer and the victim by misusing some expressions. The Al-Aqsa storm operation is just a reaction to the continuation of occupation and the aggressions against the Palestinians, and in response to the widespread crimes of the Zionist regime in recent months. In fact, this operation was the volcanic eruption of the concentrated anger of the entire Palestinian nation against 75 years of continuous and widespread crimes by the Zionist regime, especially in recent months by the Netanyahu government. according to international law, resisting aggression and occupation, including by armed means, is the inherent and legitimate right of the Palestinian of any nation, including the Palestinian nation, and it does not require the permission or order of any country or institution to exercise it. The place and how to exercise this right is based on the recognized international law. Those who repeatedly speak about the necessity of avoidance of an expansion of this conflict, and of course the Islamic Republic of Iran, we have never been after the expansion or the spread of war, and we will never be supporting it. But if, in the truest sense of the word, they don't want this war to spread out, they need to pressure the Zionist regime to fully and immediately stop the war crimes of the Israeli regime if they don't want the conflict to spread out. The recent statements of the official and military authorities of the Zionist regime and its actions in Gaza prove that the killing of more than 7,000 civilians, of which more than 62% are children and women, and the wounding and maiming of more than 17,000 civilians, completely cutting off water, electricity, fuel, food, and medicine to a population of several million, and preventing any effective assistance to them, and brutally and extensively destroying residential places, mosques, churches, hospitals, and infrastructure facilities, have been carried out completely, deliberately, and with an intent of revenge and collective punishment, which are explicitly prohibited under international law, and leave no room for doubt that these actions are a clear violation of international law and a clear example of the crime of aggression and war crimes, and also crime against humanity and genocide. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the actions of the United States, too, which directly participates in this battle through financial and armed support, as well as direct military action and effective political support, are a clear violation of the Charter and international legal obligations of that country, and as a result hold it internationally responsible. In addition, why the United States itself is actually and in practice and directly involved in committing crimes against Palestinians, it is not in a position to invite others to exercise self-restraint and refrain from spreading the war. Therefore, we strongly warn against the uncontrollable consequences of the unlimited financial, arms, and operational supports by the White House to the Tel Aviv regime, which have led to the expansion and added to the severity of the bombardments of the civilians and the Palestinian women and children in Gaza and the West Bank. The current developments in Palestine also clearly prove that the only result of any normalization of relations with Tel Aviv is tantamount to ignoring the legitimate and historical rights of the Palestinian nation. But any kind of normalization of ties with the Israeli regime is doomed to failure. Preventing the escalation of the Palestinian situation, especially considering the current turbulent and tumultuous conditions in different regions of the world, is a global and collective responsibility. We, on our part, are ready to play a more serious role in this field, in line with our recent efforts in order to restore peace and security in the west of Asia. In this line, the leaders of the Hamas Liberation Palestinian movement have voiced their readiness to release the non-military prisoners to us, and the Islamic Republic of Iran stands ready to play its part in this very important humanitarian endeavor along with Qatar and Turkey. Naturally, the release of the 6,000 Palestinian prisoners is another necessity and responsibility of the global community. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to thank the positive and realistic positions of the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, and his efforts on the ground for sending humanitarian aid to Gaza and immediately stopping the war. I would like to emphasize that it is expected from the United Nations to employ a strong terminology and under the 7th chapter of the United Nations Charter force the Zionist regime to immediately stop its war crimes, genocide, and the mass killing of civilians, and provide other grounds for the full realization of the Palestinian nation's right to self-determination. This is, of course, the inherent duty and obligation of the United Nations, which has been delayed for decades for the aforesaid reasons. Now, we all expect the current meeting of the General Assembly that has been held to delve into the Gaza and Palestinian crisis. We expect it to pass a strong resolution which is effective and influential by the General Assembly of the UN that will lead to an immediate stop to war crimes against Gaza and the lifting of the human blockade and the extensive sending of the humanitarian aid and the stopping to the forced displacement of the residents of Gaza. Thank you for your attention.
For Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I now give the floor to His Excellency Jean Axelborn, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Luxembourg. Your Excellency.
President, at the outset, Luxembourg would like to thank you for convening this resumed 10th Extraordinary Emergency Session of the General Assembly. Unfortunately, war continues to rage in the Middle East. The risk of a regional escalation is very much real, and yet the Security Council has not yet managed to shoulder its responsibility by adopting a resolution on the situation, and this owing to vetoes cast and divisions within the Council. Against this backdrop, it's important for the General Assembly to address this issue, as well as for all member states who wish to do so to be able to take the floor. Regional peace and security, as well as international peace and security, are at stake. President, as I already said at the Security Council during the high-level public debate convened by Brazil the day before yesterday, nothing can justify the atrocities committed by Hamas terrorists and by Islamic Jihad, targeting Israeli civilians on the 7th of October. Nothing can justify these barbaric acts, which shook the world. We condemn them in the strongest possible terms, just as the United Nations Secretary General did earlier. Luxembourg would like to unequivocally reaffirm Israel's right to defend itself within the framework of international law. Having said that, I would like to refer to what President Biden said. He called on Israel not to be guided by rage, recalling that the United States committed errors when responding to the September 11th terrorist attacks. Israel must act in keeping with international humanitarian law and must also ensure the protection of civilians. The people of Gaza are not Hamas. They should not be held responsible for crimes committed by terrorists. The people of Gaza should not be subjected to collective punishments. The UN Secretary General called for a de-escalation and for a humanitarian ceasefire. To begin with, humanitarian pauses should be established. These pauses could eventually lead to a ceasefire. This would allow for the delivery of emergency humanitarian assistance. It would also facilitate the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, and it would also help to ensure the safety of the civilian population in Gaza. This would save lives. Too many civilian lives have already been lost. Rapid and unfettered humanitarian access must be re-established without delay. We welcome the first deliveries of humanitarian assistance to the people living in the Gaza Strip over the last few days. We thank the Secretary General, Egypt and the United States for facilitating the secure passage of these goods. Nonetheless, the people of Gaza need lasting humanitarian assistance which would cover all the people in need. To date, emergency deliveries of assistance excluded fuel, and yet fuel is absolutely vital for hospitals to operate as well as for the desalination of water. United Nations facilities and all hospitals, clinics, schools, all humanitarian personnel, none of the above, none of them should ever be targeted by parties to a conflict. UNRWA, which is currently providing shelter to 600,000 people in the Gaza Strip, as well as other humanitarian agencies in the field, urgently need to receive urgent support so as to discharge their mandate. As for Luxembourg, we've decided to contribute 2.5 million euros, an additional 2.5 million euros to humanitarian efforts in Gaza and in the region, in particular supporting UNRWA, the World Food Programme, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA. This emergency assistance will bring our total support to roughly 12 million euros. That's for the year 2023. The conflict, which began on the 7th of October, has resulted in over 6,000 lives lost in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territory. Hundreds of children have been killed. 38 UNRWA personnel have also lost their lives. I'd like to pay tribute to the heroic work being undertaken by all humanitarian actors out in the field. They're braving every danger to tend to civilians affected by this conflict. In particular, I'd like to pay tribute to the ICRC. Its teams in Gaza are working in particularly testing conditions. I join the ICRC's call for the upholding of international humanitarian law by all parties. President, I've visited Gaza on a number of occasions since I became minister in 2004. For years now, Gaza has been an open-air prison. The living conditions there are extreme. Civilians in Gaza are suffering doubly. First of all, from the Israeli blockade, but also the bombing, and also because Hamas is using them as human shields. There is a serious risk of this conflict being transformed into a regional inferno. And this applies also to the West Bank, where we've seen an increase in settler violence and the forced transfer of Palestinian communities. Both of these have reached alarming levels. We must absolutely avoid any spillover of this conflict. In order to do this, we must work, the international community must work in conflict and with all the main actors in the region. The international community must urgently restart the Middle Eastern peace process and pay it the attention it deserves. The Day for Peace in the Middle East initiative, which was held here in New York in September, can be viewed as a first step in this direction. Luxembourg remains committed to a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which would uphold Israel's right to security, all the while also respecting Palestinians' right to self-determination and to dignity. A just, lasting, and comprehensive peace based on the two-state solution within the 1967 borders, with two democratic states living side by side and maintaining the status quo in the holy sites in Jerusalem. This is the only viable path to breaking the cycle of violence. President, this is the path we must commit ourselves to in the name of our common humanity. the humanity which we share with Israelis and Palestinians, with Palestinians and Israelis. Thank you.
I thank the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Luxembourg. I now give the floor to the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs for Guatemala, His Excellency Mario Adolfo Bucaro Flores. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, we are participating in the resumed emergency special session at a time of profound sadness and pain for humanity. And we would like to express our most sincere condolences to the many victims. We stand in solidarity with the families, and we demand the release of the hostages, amongst whom are babies, children, women, and people of advanced age. This General Assembly cannot forget that the crisis that we are currently facing is triggered by atrocious terrorist attacks brought on by the Hamas terrorist group on the 7th of October, which have impacted both Israelis and Palestinians and people of other nationalities. It's caused death, damage, suffering, and destruction. It has also created a humanitarian situation of enormous proportion. We would also express our solidarity with the humanitarian workers who attend this grave situation and present our condolences to those who have lost their lives in the exercise of this noble function. Guatemala reiterates its condemnation in the most energetic terms for the terrorist attacks committed by Hamas against the State of Israel and its civilian population. Hamas is confusing the Palestinian cause with justification of terrorism, and this is a very serious moral and strategic error, both for the Palestinian cause and the efforts that have been undertaken thus far in order to bring peace in the territory. We also condemn the attacks of the terrorist group Hezbollah on Israel in breach of the resolution that establishes the Blue Line, which is the border between Israel and Lebanon, and which has cost the lives of civilians, both Israeli and Palestinians. Today, more than ever, it's worthwhile to recall the words of Golda Meir, and she said, if the groups that are in favor of Palestine were to lay down their arms today, there would be no more violence. But if the Israelis were to lay down their arms today, there would be no state of Israel. End quote. Mr. President, it's necessary for this General Assembly to recognize that it is the right of the State of Israel to self-preservation and to defend its people given this terrifying context. The lack of this recognition will not contribute to seeking dialogue, peace, and security in the region, and especially for the world. To the contrary, it puts all of mankind and humanity at risk. This General Assembly should act in order to reduce polarization and to discourage action and speech of hate, and the only way to do so is to stand united all together against terrorism, clearly and unequivocally condemning the actions of Hamas and other terrorist organizations with extremist and violent ideologies, and demand also from them that they cease their practices of putting arsenals and terrorist infrastructures in the basements of hospitals, schools, and religious centers, which then undermine the protection of civilians and use them as human shields. Given this catastrophic situation, which has created this terrible conflict, we are pleased to learn that humanitarian assistance is reaching people, and we urge acceleration of the pauses. But at the same time, it needs to be done carefully and verifying that these pauses are not used unduly on terrorist groups to commit new acts that would affect the civilian population and worsen the situation. For the United Nations to effectively exercise its responsibility in the area of prevention and resolution of conflict that affect international peace and security, be it through the Security Council or the General Assembly, balanced resolutions need to be adopted that take into account all elements of the situation, and that would include, in this case, Israel's right to legitimate defense and safeguarding the peoples of Israel's right to self-preservation. We're in time to save lives and to promote dialogue and negotiation between the parties to achieve generalized peace based on the vision of two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, be able to live side by side in peace. It is vital to recall that the State of Israel has the sovereign right to protect its citizens and to guarantee its security, and that element is absent from the draft resolution presented before this General Assembly. And for that reason, Guatemala will vote against this resolution. We urge all member states present here to consider doing the same. Thank you.
I thank the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs for Guatemala. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Retno Lestrani Prausandri Masudi, Your Excellency, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. Your Excellency.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, I'm standing here not only as the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, but also as a woman, a mother, and a grandmother. I plea, stop the killing, protect the civilian, let in the humanitarian assistance. Use your heart for justice and humanity. Mr. President, countless times have we stood in this hall to relieve the plight of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Countless times have we asked the General Assembly for emergency session on the fate of the Palestinian people. Countless times have our hope been crushed due to narrow political interests. The world seems divided in different realities, as if there is a refusal to see the catastrophe in Gaza. The fact is, attacks and killings continue to take place. Yet, amid such a large number of victims, the Security Council failed to take decisive action. 2 days ago, we reminded the Security Council of their moral obligation to save the lives of innocent people. Bring humanity back in the Security Council, and humanity must come first. Mr. President, my presence here today is to defend justice and humanity, Indonesia condemns, in the strongest terms, Israel's violence against Palestinians, against hospitals and places of worship in Gaza. Indiscriminate killings, kidnapping, and collective punishment of civilians must also be condemned because it is inhuman and against international law. This session must rise to the occasion where the Security Council failed to do so. The General Assembly must prove that we, the people of the United Nations, believe in the dignity and worth of human lives. In this regard, 3+1 concrete steps that we should take. First, stop the aggression to prevent more civilian casualties. The General Assembly should demand an immediate, durable, and fully respected ceasefire. We must be able to avoid future recurrence of the atrocities. The General Assembly should call for accountability, including the establishment of an independent commission of inquiry to investigate this horrifying humanitarian situation. Second, ensure humanitarian access and protection of civilians. I call the General Assembly, together with relevant UN agencies, to step up efforts in providing humanitarian assistance in Gaza. We must continue to support the effort by the UN Secretary-General and key countries to allow humanitarian assistance to take place. With the destruction and human suffering in Gaza, 10, 20, 100 trucks loads of humanitarian goods just not enough. Therefore, the General Assembly must call for an immediate, unrestricted, and sustained humanitarian aid. For our part, we will triple our voluntary contribution to UNRWA and call on the international community to support the UNRWA. Indonesia is also committed to send humanitarian assistance. Third, reject the forced transfer of civilians in Gaza. Colleagues, people should not be forced to move against their will. The call to evacuate the areas of North Gaza adds to the devastation of continuous bombardment of homes, blockade of electricity, gas, fuel, water, and years of collective punishment. This is a crime against humanity. The General Assembly should call for the stop of these evacuation orders, protect civilians, and ensure their safety and well-being, in particular children, and allow their safe movement. Mr. President, my final point, there will be no peace until we solve the root causes of the conflict. There will be no peace until we solve the root causes of the conflict. Resumption of the peace process to realizing the two-state solution is a must. We must stop the systematic effort of the occupying power that may leave nothing left to be negotiated or no one left to negotiate with. We must not allow the Palestinians to have no other choice but to accept injustice for the rest of their lives. It is our duty to stop the injustice now. Enough is enough. To conclude, if you care about humanity, use your heart to vote yes to the resolution. Indonesia stands with the people of Palestine. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad of Algeria, His Excellency Ahmed Attaf. Your Excellency.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the compassionate and benevolent. May peace be on the faithful prophet. President, the delegation of Algeria should like to thank you and express to you our gratitude for meeting our joint request submitted by the Arab Group and the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, OIC. We requested an emergency extraordinary session of the General Assembly following the failure of the Security Council to genuinely protect the United Nations Charter and failure to protect the principles and purposes contained therein, a failure to protect international peace and security. So, here we are, once again, speaking before this inclusive United Nations body to offset and compensate the Security Council's inability to afford the necessary protection to the Palestinian people and to confront all of the terrible things which are raining down on the Gaza Strip, which is mourning. Once again, we're having recourse to the General Assembly, owing to the paralysis of the Security Council, the Security Council's inability to shoulder its responsibilities and obligations vis-à-vis the Palestinian cause. following its failure to act to dissuade the occupying power, Israel, to prevent its tyranny, its domination, its failure to protect Palestinians to protect civilians in Palestine, specifically in the Gaza Strip. Here we are, yet again, having recourse to the General Assembly in order to ensure justice is done for the Palestinian people, to ensure that their just cause is upheld. We are here to ensure respect for their legitimate aspirations to a national sovereign state. For this people, a people whose rights were stolen from them, a people who, nevertheless, have the resolve to resist. The land of these people was seized. Their property has been destroyed. And yet, they remain determined to impose their presence. This determination has not wavered. These people, their requests have been ignored. And yet they are tenacious and resilient. They will continue defending their rights. The Palestinian people has paid and continues to pay a very heavy price. And it can only be paid by those fighting for a noble, lofty cause, an inalienable cause, which is part and parcel of a national project. The complicity and the shirking of the responsibility of the Security Council, this is something we've said on numerous occasions over the last 70 years. We've seen a vicious cycle over and over, which cannot and has not been broken, despite its ramifications and all of the damage it's done, consistently, repeatedly. Today, much like in the past, we are bearing witness to the following. The same causes, the same consequences, terrible consequences, unbridled Israeli occupation, the most abominable, the most heinous crimes, no definitive or lasting and just solution to the Palestinian cause, a lack of solutions, and this is having the following consequences. Peace, security, and stability in this part of the world is being held hostage. The Palestinian people can't go on any longer. They're fed up with these double standards. They can't put up any longer with the non-constructive, unjustified understanding. And in fact, the Israeli occupying power is making the most of this situation. The worst of it is that the Palestinian people are suffering. They're suffering from the international community's indifference vis-à-vis the injustices, the oppression, the tyranny that they've been subjected to. We're telling the Palestinians that when the situation calms down, that their cause is not a priority for the international community. And yet when Palestine is victim to attacks, all of the efforts that are undertaken, and they're modest, they're few and far between, all of the efforts are directed to addressing the consequences of an absence of peace instead of working towards peace. An entire generation of Palestinians has never experimented with the path to, has never experienced the path to peace. An entire generation hasn't seen a single serious initiative targeted towards getting back on that path. A whole generation of Palestinians which hasn't seen a single instance of international action geared towards addressing the situation, responding to their legitimate aspirations to restore their freedom, to put an end to the occupation of their land, allowing Palestinians to exercise their rights and create an independent state. Isn't it high time that we resolve this situation? which constitutes a violation of the values and principles our organization cherishes. Isn't it time that we put paid to this historical injustice which these people are being subjected to? People who can no longer continue fighting this haughty, arrogant, occupying power. Isn't it time that we start a large-scale international movement for peace, in the name of peace? A movement that can rekindle hope among Palestinians. A serious and honest movement which could help uphold the national, inalienable, and non-time-barred rights of the Palestinian people. Rights which cannot be rescinded. The situation in the occupied Palestinian territory requires us to act swiftly, urgently, to put an end to the Israeli aggression, which is unjust. It's unjust vis-à-vis the Gaza Strip. We must aid the Palestinian people, afford them international protection. We need to take collective action with the involvement of all influential international parties. This action must be effective so that we can achieve fair and lasting peace in the Middle East on the basis of international documents, adopted documents which have international legitimacy. Our General Assembly has always been the rostrum from which we fight for just causes. First and foremost, the Palestinian cause. Under these very taxing circumstances, it's up to the General Assembly to reaffirm its fixed principles within a fair framework and as part of its commitment to uphold the legal pillars so as to allow for an independent and fully sovereign Palestinian state. From this vantage point, Algeria would like to reiterate its call for fully fledged membership to be conferred upon that brother state, Palestine, thereby enshrining the legal, political, moral, and ethical rights of the state of Palestine, so that this state can raise its voice in the community of nations and be heard, so that it can defend its priorities. This is a decisive measure vis-à-vis attacks aimed at undermining, disfiguring Palestinians. Palestine, which is being buried alive but which refuses to perish. This is an important goal from a strategic standpoint as well. We must use all means at our disposal, use every opportunity offered to us by the General Assembly, this forum. The General Assembly can, in fact, play a key determining role so as to achieve this lofty objective. And in fact, by meeting this objective, we can strengthen the key pillars of the Palestinian national project. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the Honorable Minister for Foreign Affairs and National Community abroad from Algeria. I now give the floor to the Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs of Colombia, Her Excellency Elizabeth Taylor Jay. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I appreciate the initiative of convening this emergency session of the General Assembly so that the international community can raise its voice in an energetic condemnation and rejection of the violence and suffering caused to the civilian population in the Middle East, especially the most vulnerable women, children, elderly, and the sick in the Middle East. Colombia reaffirms its historic support for a peaceful, definitive, and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian question based on the two-state solution that would live next to each other within safe and secure borders, in keeping with what is set forth in the relevant resolutions of this General Assembly and the Security Council. We deeply regret the blood-curdling escalation of violence that we have seen in recent weeks and the ongoing violations of international humanitarian law. Resuming the 10th extraordinary session of this General Assembly shows that an absence of a definitive response that's adapted to international law to the conflict between Israel and Palestine creates deplorable consequences for the civilian population. It destabilizes the region and calls into question the very meaning of life and humanity. Excellencies, all conflicts are complex, and there are many variables to address in them with a view to achieving a definitive and peaceful solution. This is the lesson that my country, Colombia, knows and has learned. We know from decades of how a conflict has affected us. Throughout the decades of the armed conflict and many attempts to negotiate peace, we have learned that only truly giving up the expression of differences through violence is absolutely vital and essential in order for societies to make a transition towards living together in peace. This is the invitation extended by my government. The President, Gustavo Petro, extends on a daily basis in his term, both inside our country and in different international scenarios, because we know firsthand that violence only produces more violence and more loss of lives, leaving in its wake a very unfortunate and harmful legacy for future generations. Colombia regrets the inability of the Security Council to unanimously and decisively condemn the violations of international humanitarian law that we continue to witness on a daily basis. And we energetically call on the international community to show unequivocally its determination and commitment to uphold the mandates of the organization expressed through the current normative instruments. We welcome with satisfaction the efforts of different countries to put a halt to the violence and guarantee access to humanitarian assistance to Gaza and other territories affected by the conflict. And we reiterate our call for an immediate cessation of hostilities. We call for the respect of international humanitarian law and the protection of life. And finally, we would like to insist on this call put forth by President Petro on the need to convene a worldwide peace conference to find a definitive solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you.
I thank the Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs of Colombia. I now give the floor to State Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs of Slovenia, Her Excellency Sanja Stiglic. Your Excellency.
Mr. President, the unprecedented and dire situation unfolding before our eyes is a test for the Security Council, for the General Assembly, and for this organization as a whole. We hope that the Security Council will soon be able to unite its voice and speak to the civilians in the region. Current silence is deafening. As the Special Coordinator Venezuelan has stated, and I quote, "We are at the brink of a deep and dangerous abyss that could change the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if not of the Middle East as a whole." Like most delegates in this hall, Slovenia is deeply troubled with the speed of the deterioration of the situation. The conflict can easily spiral out of control, escalate, and spill over in the region. We recognize the efforts made by the United Nations, several states and leaders to avert the crisis and humanitarian disaster. We call on all countries in the region and beyond to act responsibly and to cooperate and engage in a constructive dialogue to de-escalate the conflict. Mr. President, there can be no justification for the brutal terrorist attacks of Hamas on Israel, and we strongly condemn it. It has triggered a new cycle of violence and civilian suffering. We call for immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Israel has a right to self-defense in line with international law. At the same time, the international law is providing all civilians protection during the conflict. The scenes we are witnessing are heartbreaking. Majority of those suffering the most are women and children. No civilian should be a target, and neither used as a hostage or a shield. Slovenia calls on all parties to fully respect international humanitarian law and humanitarian principles. We support all efforts of the UN Secretary General and other parts of the UN system in addressing the pressing humanitarian situation. Without access to water, food, medical supplies, fuel, gas, and electricity, and with constant attacks on civilian objects, schools, hospitals, and protected shelters, the already dire situation in Gaza is turning into a human catastrophe. There is an urgent need for a humanitarian ceasefire or pause and humanitarian corridor, unimpeded and safe access for humanitarian aid, equipment, and personnel. Massively scale up our humanitarian assistance to respond to the immense needs on the ground. Slovenia commends the work of humanitarian agencies and their personnel in Gaza, who continue to provide assistance and protection to the people, often at a great sacrifice, paying the ultimate price with their own lives. Recognizing the deteriorating humanitarian situation, Slovenia has recently substantially increased its funding to UNRWA and its activities in support of the Palestinian people. Mr. President, resumption of a meaningful political process which will lead to the two-state solution, living side by side in peace and security, is of urgent and paramount importance. Slovenia has and will continue to support initiatives that reinforce the Middle East peace process, including the Peace Day effort. The Palestinian question has been a testing ground for this organization for far too long. It is high time to turn to the UN Charter and what it mandated us to do, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Let us make sure that humanity prevails. Thank you.
I thank the State Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovenia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Peter Andres Steire, State Secretary for Security Policy of Hungary. Your Excellency.
Mr. Colleague, while we align ourselves with the statement that will be delivered by the European Union, I will mind. Mr. President, on 7th October, Hamas launched operation that included a barrage of over 3,000 missiles. Targeted Israeli civilian locations, including residential areas and residential civilian locations. This resulted in more than 1,400 fatal casualties, more than 4,000 wounded, and more than 200 soldiers and civilians who have been taken hostage. I'm here today to condemn in the strongest possible terms these barbaric and heinous terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas and the ongoing indiscriminate missile attacks against Israeli civilians. Palestinian civilians must also be protected. In this context, Hamas must cease to use civilians as a human shield. In face of such violent terrorist attacks executed by Hamas, Hungary strongly emphasizes for quickly attacks on Israel and immediately release all hostages and spare us from further suffering. The region is witnessing one of the most difficult crises in its modern history. Therefore, our engagement in order to achieve de-escalation of the tensions and avoid this fight against terror turning into a full-fledged military conflict between countries, engulfing the region into the horrors of war. Make no mistake, armed and extremist groups operating in the region will make every effort to take advantage of this conflict to further their destructive agenda. Mr. President, immediate, safe, sustainable, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid should reach those vulnerable civilians that are in real need in Gaza, whilst ensuring that such aid is not abused by terrorist organizations. It is also crucial for humanitarian assistance and medical support to reach those held in captivity as hostages. It is essential that warring parties maintain a minimum of humanity even during the worst of war. We appreciate the extensive efforts made by Egypt, the UN specialized agencies, and the ICRC to support the delivery of aid. As I mentioned at the beginning, it must be a priority to prevent regional escalation, including the deterioration of the situation in the West Bank. We call on all regional actors to refrain from any action that can further aggravate the situation. We underline the need to engage broadly with the Palestinian Authority, the Israeli authorities, as well as regional and international partners who could have a positive role to play in preventing further escalation. We remain committed to lasting and sustainable peace through reinvigorated efforts. Mr. President, we are at a global inflection point. International peace and security has not faced such a serious challenge since the Cold War. Yet, the international community and the UN, once again, has not been able to fulfill its mandate and stabilize conflicts and restore peace. While acknowledging that the situation in the Middle East in general is extremely complex and multifaceted, offering no easy solutions, we have to emphasize we must not let terrorists achieve their goal. We must not let these terrorist attacks jeopardize the hard-won recent achievements, including, in particular, the Abraham Accords. We should not let the darkness of terrorism extinguish the beacon of hope. Terrorist attacks must never be condoned, as these will undermine the very fabric of the democratic and peaceful societies. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Hungary, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba, His Excellency Gerardo Penalva Portal, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Permanent Representative to the UN.
Hemos seguido con
With great consternation and emotion, we have followed the very grave events in the Middle East. In that context, Cuba supports the resumption of this 10th extraordinary emergency session. The main priority for the General Assembly at this moment should be to bring a cessation of violence and the administration of urgent humanitarian assistance for the suffering Palestinian people. We demand an immediate ceasefire, and we demand an end to the bellicose rhetoric and stop the forced removal of Palestinians from the land that by right they belong to. Cuba reiterates its deep-seated concern for the resumed violence in the region, which is a result of 75 years of Israeli practices of occupation, illegal occupation, and settlements, in flagrant violation of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people on their own land. This is also the result of the protracted lack of respect of the principles and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations and international law, including many relevant resolutions of the United Nations. In the midst of the current humanitarian disaster in occupied Palestinian territory of Gaza and West Bank, Cuba reiterates its solidarity, which is unwavering, with the Arab and Palestinian causes. We, in the most energetic terms, condemn the assassination of civilians, especially women, children, and humanitarian workers of the United Nations, through bombing, indiscriminate bombing of the people in Gaza, and the destruction of houses, infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, and hospital. Cuba rejects and has always rejected the death of civilians and innocent people for all parties involved in this conflict, without making any difference of ethnic, faith, or nationality differences, as referenced by the distinguished Vice Minister of Jordan on behalf of the Arab group. We also condemn the cutting off of water services, electricity, and fuel to the people of Gaza, which considerably worsens the already precarious humanitarian situation, which is a result of the embargo on Gaza Strip, which in itself is a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Nothing justifies such actions, which are a collective punishment, grave violations of international humanitarian law, and war crimes and crimes against humanity. The impunity with which the Israeli government acts can only be explained given its confidence that it will not be held accountable for its acts and that it has the support of the government of the United States. It is shameful that once again the Security Council has been unable to fulfill its mandate. It's regrettable that the United States has, in the Security Council, vetoed 46 resolutions related to the situation in the Middle East, including those on the Palestinian question, and the most recent was just a few days ago. An end must be put to the double standards, selectivity, and political manipulation, which makes vulnerable the cause of international peace and security and jeopardizes it. We demand the government of the United States not continue paralyzing the Security Council, using the anti-democratic and obsolete power of veto in order to protect the occupying powers' actions. It's time for the Security Council to fulfill its functions and uphold its own resolutions on the Palestinian question. We reiterate once again our vigorous rejection of the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, along with the illegal policy of settlement of Israel and all of its settlement policies. We condemn the latent annexation plans of the Jordan Valley and other parts of the West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem annexation plans. We think it's urgent to mobilize, under the coordination of the United Nations, humanitarian emergency relief in order to attend to the catastrophic situation in Gaza, and we call upon all involved parties to facilitate the entry and distribution of this vital humanitarian aid. We call on member states to guaranteeing sufficient, predictable, and sustained funding for UNRWA. It is now more important than ever that we provide all possible support to UNRWA so it can fulfill its important work on the ground. We stress the unavoidable need for a broad, lasting, and fair solution to the conflict between Palestine and Israel based on two states which are independent and which allow the Palestinian people to exercise their right to free self-determination and to have an independent sovereign state within the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and to also guarantee the right of return of the refugees. Cuba supports and will contribute to the extent that it can to all international legitimate efforts to put an end to the massacre which has been taking place already for 20 days. Every moment of inaction will cost the lives of more innocent people. We must act immediately. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mauritania, speaking on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Member States of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in my capacity as Chair of OIC Group. Mr. President, we convene today in this 10th emergency special session of the General Assembly in the wake of Security Council failure due to the use of veto by a permanent member, once again furthering the Council's ability to uphold its charter duty to maintain international peace and security and to protect civilians in regard to the grave situation in Gaza Strip and the rest of occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Despite this Assembly's repeated affirmation that the United Nations has a permanent responsibility towards the question of Palestine until it is justly resolved in all its aspects in accordance with international law, the international community continues to fail the people of Palestinian their inalienable right, included to self-determination and to return, continue to be denied and to be systematically and grossly violated by Israel. The occupying power, which persists in its blatant contempt of the role of the law, included the Charter, international humanitarian law, and international humanitarian right law, committing grave breach with impunity. Thus, we are witnessing yet another daily Israeli onslaught against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, and assault that has surpassed all levels of brutality and humanity, terrorizing the entire civilian population and resulting in thousands of innocent victims. So far, more than 6,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been killed in Israeli airstrike and bombardment as of 24 October, with 68% of the victims being children and women. More than 16,291 Palestinians have been injured. Over 1,550 people are missing, presumed to be trapped and died under the rebel, among them hundreds of children. It is shocking that in the span of 2 weeks since Israeli military aggression on Gaza was launched, about 1.5 million Palestinian civilians have been forcibly displaced from their homes, with nearly 90,000 people crowded into 100 UNRWA designated emergency shelters, according to available data provided by the OCHA. They have fled to those shelters in fear, seeking refuge under the UN flag, as their homes and neighborhood, school and hospital, mosque and church are being indiscriminately and deliberately destroyed by Israeli airstrikes, all in grave breach of international humanitarian law. Yes, as we all know by now, even UN facilities have not been spared. 38 UNRWA schools and facilities have been hit in Israeli strike, causing death and injury to civilian, damage to facilities, and widespread fear and panic. 29 UNRWA personnel have been killed in Israeli attack, along with other humanitarian workers in the Gaza Strip. We reiterate the call made by the OIC Extraordinary Executive Committee meeting on Foreign Ministers held on 18 October 2023 for an immediate cessation of illegal and inhuman Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people and the rejection of a targeting of civilians under any pretext. The forced displacement from their homes and their starvation and denial of safe access to humanitarian aid and essential supplies for survival even worse. All these actions are in contravention of international norms and law, including the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and human rights law, and the most basic shared human principles and values. They are illegal and reprehensible. They must be firmly condemned and cease forthwith, while Israel, the occupying power, must be compelled to apply with all of its obligations under international law without exception and be held accountable for its breach. We hereby underscore that the fact that a ceasefire is urgently needed and there must be protection for the civilian population in the Gaza Strip and the rest of occupying Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. All efforts at this time must prioritize the protection and safety of human lives in accordance with international law and our shared moral and humanitarian obligation and values. Moreover, Israel must end its inhuman siege on Gaza. The OIC underlines in this regard the urgency to provide immediate and sustained humanitarian, medical, and relief aid, including food, water, fuel, electricity, and non-food emergency items to the Gaza Strip, included through the UN institution and particularly the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA. Assistance is desperately needed, especially by the 1.4 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes and lost everything as a result of this aggression. The OIC wishes to also draw attention to Israeli systematic violence, human rights violation, provocation, incitement, and acts of terror against the Palestinian civilian population in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which have not ceased for one day. Since the beginning of the month, Israeli occupying forces and extremist settlers have escalated their rampage through the population, cities, villages, and refugee camp, killing more than 91 Palestinians, including 27 children, included over 1,334 civilians, demolishing homes, desecrating Islamic and Christian holy sites, torching properties, destroying crops, uprooting trees, forcibly displacing national peace and security, which is being threatened by this ongoing injustice and the far-reaching consequences for a long and accountability and a just solution remain elusive. Clearly, the absence of any moral, legal, or political deterrence has only emboldened Israel, the occupying power, to carry on with impunity with its illegal policy of colonial settlement and annexation, blockade, forced displacement of Palestinian civilians, systematic ethnic cleansing, organizing acts of terrorism, desecration of holy places, especially Al-Aqsa Mosque, and to persist in its denial and violation of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and independence. This illegal situation must be brought to an end. The OIC expressed its deep regret that the Security Council paralysis unable to fulfill its duty and implement its own resolution. The Council is failing in its historical obligation toward the question of Palestine, such obligations that remain pending despite passage of over 75 years, thereby severely undermining its key role in maintaining international peace and security and protecting defenseless civilians, including the Palestinian civilian population in Gaza Strip and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. The continued use of veto is unacceptable and irresponsible under this crisis situation. Consequently, there is an urgent need for immediate action by the international community, including the Security Council, to bring a halt to this Israeli aggression, to end impunity and assure accountability of Israel, the occupying power, for its war crimes and crimes against humanity, including this aggression and its more than 16 years illegal blockade on Gaza Strip, to provide international protection for the Palestinian people and to open humanitarian corridors so as to allow all necessary supplies of medicine, food, water, fuel, and other life necessities reach the civilian population in Gaza without delay. We express the hope that the General Assembly's action will make a tangible contribution in this regard and call for full respect of its decision. In closing, I reaffirm the historic support of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation for the realization of legitimate, inalienable rights of Palestinian people to self-determination and the realization of the sovereignty and independence of the State of Palestine over all the Palestinian territory occupying since 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with the relevant UN resolution and the Arab Peace Initiative. I thank you. Sayyid al-Rais.
Mr. President, allow me now to deliver a statement in my national capacity to comment on what is happening in the Gaza Strip. At the outset, I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations for his responsiveness to our request to hold this session, and we would like to join the statement that has been issued by the Arab group delivered by His Excellency, the Jordanian Foreign Minister. After the unfortunate and regrettable failure by the Security Council to arrive at a solution to this continuous tragedy, the Arab group and the members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Non-Aligned Movement and other states decided to submit a request to the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations to resume the 10th emergency special session to discuss the situation in Gaza. The current situation in the Gaza Strip is tragic in every sense of the word. Thousands were killed in a continuous and indiscriminate shelling using internationally banned weapons, an aggression that takes no consideration the sanctity of hospitals or mosques or churches or schools. And the UNRWA staff and journalists were also not spared. Civilians are living in a difficult and exceptional times as they are being shelled and as all means of basic existence are being taken away from 2 million civilians in breach of all international laws and values. The current situation, Mr. President, requires us to combine our efforts to put an immediate halt to hostilities and to allow for the unconditional delivery of urgent humanitarian assistance and to put an end to the disposition of Palestinian civilians. This is a natural result of decades of ignoring the need for a political solution to the Palestinian cause, which comes in the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with the United Nations resolutions of relevance and the Arab Peace Initiative. And here I would like to quote from the speech that was delivered by the Mauritanian president last Saturday at the Cairo Peace Summit, which was held in Egypt. And I quote, "The time has come for us for everyone to reach the conclusion that no one in this region will enjoy peace and security sustainably unless others enjoy it as well. Because peace cannot be achieved by winning a battle or winning a war. Peace is contingent upon it applying to everyone. End of quote. Therefore, the international community must stand united in demanding a negotiated political track where two states, a Palestinian one and an Israeli one, exist side by side, peacefully and securely. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, what we are witnessing, these are the atrocities that we're witnessing are a source of shame for humanity. And this is why we present a humanitarian resolution that aims to establish a ceasefire so that we can stop the shedding of Palestinian blood and deliver urgent humanitarian assistance. We ask all member states to join in the sponsorship of this resolution and to vote in its favor. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mauritania. We have now heard the last speaker in the debate on this item for this morning. We shall hear the remaining speakers tomorrow at 10 a.m. in this hall. We stand in adjournment. Of its resolution ES 10 20 of 13th June 2018, the Assembly decided to adjourn the 10th Emergency Special Session temporarily and to authorize the President of the General Assembly at its most recent session to resume its meeting upon request from member states. In this regard, I should like to draw the attention of delegations to document A/ES 10/958, which contains a letter dated 19th October 2023 from the permanent representatives of Jordan and Mauritania to the United Nations in their respective capacities as chairs of the Arab Group and the Organization for Islamic Cooperation Group, and document A/ES 10/961, which contains a letter dated 18th October 2023 from the permanent representatives of Nicaragua and the Russian Federation and the Chargé d'Affaires ad interim of the Syrian Arab Republic, requesting the resumption of the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly. I intend to conduct the proceedings of this meeting in accordance with the rules of procedure of the General Assembly and the past practices of its emergency special sessions. In accordance with Rule 63 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly, the President and Vice Presidents of the 68th session shall serve in the same capacity at the resumed 10th Emergency Special Session. May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to decide that the Credentials Committee of the 78th session should serve for the resumed 10th Emergency Special Session? It is so decided. In keeping with established practice, I should now like to invite the attention of the General Assembly to document A/ES 10/959 concerning member states that are in arrears in the payment of their financial contributions to the United Nations within the terms of Article 19 of the Charter. May I take it that the Assembly duly takes note of the information contained in this document? It is so decided. In this connection, may I further take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to follow the provisions of Resolution 78/2 of 5th October 2023, by which the Comoros, Sao Tome y Principe, and Somalia are permitted to vote in the General Assembly until the end of its 78th session, and also allow these member states to vote at the 10th Emergency Special Session. It is so decided. The General Assembly will now resume its consideration of Agenda Item 5, entitled Illegal Israeli Actions in Occupied East Jerusalem and the Rest of the Occupied Palestinian Territory. The President will now deliver a statement. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues, distinguished delegates, I come before you this morning deeply disturbed and distraught. Only this Tuesday, we mark the anniversary of the United Nations Charter, the day on which our organization was founded out of the ashes of the most heinous crimes against humanity in history. While there is little to incline us to celebration, we nevertheless honored the values and principles that have anchored our organization these last 75 years. Yet again, we gather amidst the gravest escalation of violence and hostility in the Middle East in decades. Perhaps the most dramatic and difficult to countenance was the Al-Ahi Baptist Hospital attack that killed several hundred people in a single incident. It is an unthinkable crime that must offend our human sensibilities. The worsening tension, the unspeakable violence, the harrowing suffering must end now. I once again condemn the attack on Israel by Hamas on the 7th of October and reject the killings and the taking of civilian hostages, including women, children, and the elderly. The brutality of the Hamas assaults is shocking and unacceptable and has no place, I repeat, has no place in our world. Similarly, I condemn and reject the indiscriminate targeting of innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip and the scale of destruction of critical infrastructure by Israel. The ceaseless bombardment of the Gaza Strip by Israel and its consequences are deeply alarming. The right of self-defense does not and cannot lawfully give license to undertake indiscriminate and disproportionate reprisal. Thousands, especially children, women, and the elderly, are being killed, injured, maimed, and forcefully displaced, and hospitals are running tragically low on basic medical supplies. The rules of war dictate that on the ground, civilians and civilian installations must always be protected at all costs. And here, in this august chamber, our preeminent priority must be to protect and to save civilian lives. It is also regrettable that among the appalling loss of lives are United Nations personnel upon whom this organization depends to provide and deliver critical humanitarian support and other services to millions of Palestinians in dire need. I express my sincere solidarity with all those who have lost their loved ones, their homes, and their sense of security or belonging. And I join the Secretary General in expressing my deepest condolences to the families of the 35 UN staff members who have lost their lives in the noble cause of humanitarian service. I also take this opportunity to pay tribute to the entire UNRWA staff and other humanitarian workers for their continued unwavering and heroic efforts under these very distressing circumstances. Excellencies, all parties to this conflict must abide by international humanitarian law and immediately create the necessary conditions to allow for an opening of humanitarian corridor to the Gaza Strip. We must ensure that urgently needed life-saving assistance reaches those in need, from the delivery of basic foodstuff to the safe passage of humanitarian aid, humanitarian and medical staff. Any action to the contrary, to deprive the people of Gaza unimpeded access to essential livelihood supply, would be a clear violation of their human rights and an affront to international humanitarian law. We, the United Nations, cannot allow our fundamental principles of human rights and of international law to be compromised. As the United Nations, we are obliged to uphold them without any conditions or reservations, and certainly without any exceptions. Over the years, the United Nations has conducted successful humanitarian operations that have had significant impacts. I am both appreciative of and encouraged by the Israeli cooperation that led to the successful passage into Gaza of some aid trucks from Egypt. But this is clearly a drop in the ocean of Gaza's 2.5 million inhabitants, almost half of whom are children. Excellencies, dear colleagues, at this juncture, the most immediate step is clear. The violence must cease and further bloodshed must be prevented. I call for the prompt and unconditional release of all hostages. I also call for an immediate, unconditional humanitarian ceasefire. And I also call for an immediate, unconditional opening of corridors of humanitarian assistance and relief. The only path to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace is a negotiated two-state solution consistent with international law, the UN Charter, and relevant United Nations resolutions. A solution that fulfills Israel's legitimate needs for security and that fulfills the state of Palestine's legitimate aspirations for an independent state. I urge all parties, state and non-state, to set aside their animosities and focus instead on averting war through prioritizing saving lives. This means focusing on the core purpose of our charter. It means engaging in dialogue and harnessing the support of the Secretary General and his special coordinator, Tor Wennesland. I also welcome international initiatives that focus on consensus building, spreading accurate and verified information, and putting an end to the violence and despair. Given the gravity of the situation on the ground, this cannot be just another business as usual session. I urge the membership to use today's session not to further fan the flames of hate, division, and revenge. Let us seize the opportunity instead to unify our purpose and our actions to save lives and to end violence. Let me assure you of my deep personal commitment to support any and all initiatives to this end. I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the observer state of Palestine.
Mr. President, colleagues, let us all remember we are meeting here while Palestinians in Gaza are under the bombs. Remember that you are speaking while families are being killed, while hospitals are coming to a halt, while neighborhoods are being destroyed, while people are fleeing from one place to another with nowhere safe to go. I urge you to choose your words carefully and to act accordingly. For all those mobilized against an even greater man-made humanitarian catastrophe or of a regional spillover. And these are worthy goals, we say. Stop the bombs, or both will happen. Stop the bombs and save lives, as the President of the General Assembly has indicated. All lives, lives of children, of civilians, of 2.3 million civilians in the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, in Gaza, a father tells his daughter about the birthday he was planning for her and asks her not to miss it. A mother laments, "My children died before they had a chance to eat." The thoughts that cross the mind of a mother in the face of such grief. 3,000 children in Gaza were killed by Israel in the last almost 3 weeks. I repeat, 3,000 children, innocent children, angels, killed in Gaza during the last 3 weeks. A man embraces his mother and pleads like a child. "Come back, I beg you. Come back, and I will take you wherever you want." He hugs her and can let go. But there is no time to mourn. More death is on the way. 1,700 women were killed by Israel in the last 2 weeks. A young man wrote, "We will not leave Gaza. We will only leave Gaza to join the heavens." A few days later, he did. 7,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel in the last almost 3 weeks. 70% of all those killed are women and children. Almost all killed are civilians. Is this the war some of you are defending? Let me repeat, is this the war that some of you are defending? Can this war be defended? These are crimes. This is barbarism. If you do not stop it for all those who were killed, stop it for all those whose lives we can still save. Jinan, a little girl under the rubbles, shouts at the people coming to rescue her. What took you so long? There are 900 Palestinian children under the rubbles, alive or dead, wondering what is taking so long, wondering if any help is on the way. Anas, a little boy who is known as Anus, crawled from under the rubbles, not to find light, but more darkness, devastations and death all around him. His ordeal has only started, not ended. 1,600 Palestinians are under the rubbles, and no one can reach them to save them or bury them. A doctor speaks of a term coined during this war: wounded child with no surviving family. 80 Palestinian families have lost 10 or more of their members. Sometimes up to 45 members of the same family were killed. 18,000 people are wounded, many treated in hospital hallways, if at all, with no anesthesia. Paramedics who have seen death time and time again break down and cry. This time is just too much. UN staff, humanitarian personnel, and doctors are standing their ground and paying the ultimate price for it. This memory is honored by some as if a natural disaster had killed them, not a UN member staff. As hospitals turn into morgues, doctors and patients alike wonder, is help on the way? Is help on the way? They are not listening to the explanations of some leaders on why the war has to go on. They just hear the bombs. They just feel the blast. They just face all this death trying to survive or to honor the pledge they took to save lives with no means to do so. People are ordered to evacuate. They look at their children. Should we head south? Will we be bombed on the way or once there? Should we go to a hospital courtyard, a UN school, a church, a mosque, sleep in our car in the streets? But bombs are everywhere. What choices do you make as a parent when there are only impossible choices, when death is everywhere, devastation is everywhere? A man stands in front of his house, turned into rubble yet another time. After a long pause, he asks, how do you bury a house? Israel has destroyed over 40% of all homes, making an entire population homeless and displaced, 1.4 million people, in the hope to forcibly transfer them outside the territory. The Israeli foreign minister came to the Security Council and said, this meeting should conclude with a clear message: bring them home. For millions of Palestinians, there is no home to go back to. For thousands, there is no family left to embrace. Not by an act of God, but by the acts of a government represented here in this chamber. He spoke of families and their pain. There is not a single family in Gaza that has not endured epic suffering. He told you horrible it was to kill civilians. Just before justifying the killing of Palestinian civilians by the thousands, he spoke of the fear felt by people when rockets are launched. Israeli bombs have not spared a single square meter of Gaza. He believes the difference between civilization and barbarism is who is doing the killing or how they do it. He believes the laws of humanity and of our international law-based order apply to others but not to Israel. That they protect Israeli lives and allow the killing of Palestinians and taking Palestinian lives. He believes Israel can pretend it is abiding by the very laws it is breaching live on your TV screens and before your eyes. That if you say Hamas enough times, the world will not be able to object to wiping off from the face of earth entire families, 4 generations at a time, or to a siege where you let in enough humanitarian aid to pretend you have a sense of humanity, but nowhere enough to address the immense needs that are growing exponentially as you keep bombing a besieged territory. He says release the hostages and takes 2 million Palestinian hostages. Let me translate these numbers. Compared to the population of Gaza, this is the equivalent of 28,000 Israelis killed, including 12,000 children and 6,800 women, 72,000 wounded, 5.6 million displaced. Is it more shocking now? More unacceptable? More outrageous? Why some feel so much pain for Israelis and so little pain for us, the Palestinians? What is the problem? Do we have the wrong faith? The wrong skin color? The wrong nationality? The wrong origin? Let me address all those who have, in these past few days, explained why one should not call for a ceasefire. How can representatives of states explain how horrible it is that 1,000 Israelis were killed and not feel the same outrage when 1,000 Palestinians are now killed every day? 1,000 Palestinians killed every day. Why not feel a sense of urgency to end their killing? Nothing can justify war crimes, crime against humanity, and genocide. Nothing can justify the killing of a single Palestinian child. Nothing. Nothing at all. Why not feel a sense of urgency to end our killing? Nothing can, as I said, justify war crimes. You are setting us back 80 years by trying to justify what Israel is doing now. How naive one has to be, or how hypocritical to pretend they don't know Israel is voluntarily killing Palestinian civilians. Who can believe that those killed by Israel are for 70% children and women, and that entire families were killed while Israel is trying to minimize civilian death? They kill all of us. They kill thousands of us and they say they are trying to minimize killing civilians. How would it look like if they were trying to maximize killing Palestinian civilians? If killing 7,000 is to minimize, killing 700,000 would be possible to maximize. We don't need you to offer us semantic reassurances about IHL and protection of civilians. We need you to honor these norms, not recall them only to justify their breach seconds later. This selective outrage is outrageous and needs to stop, and need to stop now. These people you watch in your screens for a few minutes a day, every night, while they are being slaughtered, they have survived decades of military occupation, a 16 years long blockade, and 5 wars in the Gaza Strip. They built and rebuilt their lives and their homes again and again against all odds, despite tremendous suffering. They are walking miracles. How could you leave them to be killed once again? The answer to the killing of Palestinian civilians is not the killing of Israeli civilians. And the answer to the killing of Israeli civilians is not the killing of Palestinian civilians. Vengeance is a dead end. The only path forward is justice. The only path forward is justice. Justice for the Palestinian people. Don't distort the law. Don't bend it. Don't break it. Don't betray it to accommodate Israel. Uphold it, and uphold it high. This is what we are here for as a United Nations, to save future generations from the scourge of war. Uphold it for the sake of all nations, for the credibility of these United Nations. Mr. President, Wael al-Dahduh was reporting on the massacres in Gaza. For those of you who do not, who is Wael al-Dahduh? He is the field correspondent of Al Jazeera in the Gaza Strip. As he's been doing relentlessly for days now, when he received the news of an Israeli airstrike that killed his wife, his son, and his daughter, he did something many parents do in these circumstances. He spoke to his son, waiting for an answer that never came. He told him, "Didn't you tell me you wanted to be a journalist?" His son wanted to be a journalist, even though journalists are targets in Palestine. Remember Shireen Abu Akleh? Now, the dream of the son will haunt the father. Wael said a few words that I want you to hear well. He said, "They took their vengeance out on our children." He then said in a heartbreaking voice, "Malish, allow me to explain it to you. Literally, it means that's okay. But let me tell you what I believe he meant. Let me do it in Arabic. تبا لواقع تقتل فيه غزة."
What a world where Gaza is being killed again before the cameras of the world. Shame on all those who do not respect our humanity, our dignity, our suffering. All those who justify the acts of the killer instead of standing by the victim, to all those who justify the crime and give condolences to the victim and explain that the killer is not responsible for the killing. Shame to all those who do not stand by our people in Gaza and put an end to the massacre. Shame to this forum if a word of truth is not pronounced on it. Shame to the one who will speak after me to defend the wrong and justify the killing of innocent people. There is no justice on this earth. We have God. We have only God to go to.
Finally, I appeal to all of you. Vote to stop the killing. Vote for humanitarian aid to reach those whose very survival depends on it. Vote to stop this madness. You have a chance to do something, to give an important signal. Choose justice, not vengeance. Choose to defend the law, not justify its breach. Choose peace, not more wars. Vote to put an end to almost 3 weeks of the worst double standards we have seen in decades. To restore some credibility of this place and the rules it is supposed to embody. Do not miss this chance. Lives are hanging in the balance, and every life is sacred. Please save lives, save lives, save lives. Vote for our draft resolution, and I thank you.
I now give the floor to the distinguished Deputy Prime Minister. I now give the floor to Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, we are gathered here in this hall today as a result of a resolution called Uniting for Peace. Sadly, this emergency session has nothing to do with peace. Every member state here today who is convinced that we are about to discuss yet another round of conflict in the Middle East, another dispute between Israel and the Palestinians, is wrong. The October 7th massacre